Nothing about that afternoon felt dangerous until someone decided to turn an ordinary moment into a show. The mistake had already been made, even if no one there yet understood the cost. The neighborhood sat in one of the city's older zones, where darkened brick buildings pressed in beside makeshift auto shops and small bars that survived more on routine than profit. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, but eyes never did. Every corner carried untold stories, and every silence served as a warning. Ethan Cole had been there a little over 2 weeks. He'd been released from prison after serving a long sentence. Quiet, uneventful, at least on the official record. He wore simple clothes, muted colors, nothing that drew attention, the kind of man who had learned to take up as little space as possible because being noticed almost never worked in your favor. Beside him, sitting on an improvised bench near a street grill, was Claire Donovan. She watched the flow of people with an alertness that blended caution and curiosity. She wasn't from that neighborhood or that kind of scene. Still, she didn't complain. She'd learned quickly that some choices came packaged with uncomfortable settings. "We can leave if you want," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly. His eyes were fixed on something beyond the people, beyond the street itself, as if he were measuring invisible distances. "It's fine," he said. "I just need to finish this." They didn't notice when the group began to approach. 4 men, maybe 5, all of them in black sleeveless shirts, tattoos on full display, haircuts too similar to be coincidence. They weren't loud, but they laughed easily, the kind of laughter that didn't need a real reason. The first to stand out was Ryan Keller. He walked ahead of the others, relaxed and confident, holding a half-full bottle. His eyes flicked over Claire before settling on Ethan, lingering a second longer than necessary. "Hey," Ryan said, flashing a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're not from around here, are you?" Ethan looked up slowly. There was no surprise on his face, just recognition. "Just passing through," he replied. Ryan chuckled, tilting his head as if that answer amused him. "Funny. This place tends to be selective." One of the men behind him, Mark, let out a short laugh. Another, Lucas, crossed his arms, studying the scene with growing interest. Claire sensed the shift in the air before the words sharpened. There was something about that group that echoed stories she tried not to listen to. Stories about people who confused presence with ownership. "We're about to head out," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ryan ignored her completely. His focus stayed on Ethan, now with a curious, almost childlike glint. "You don't talk much," he said. "Quiet guys usually have something to hide." Ethan didn't respond. He picked up a napkin and calmly wiped his hands. Every movement seemed deliberate, as if time moved at a different speed for him. That's what amused Ryan. "Relax," he said, lifting the bottle. "We're just messing around." He stepped closer. The smell of alcohol blended with the smoke from the grill, creating a heavy, uncomfortable haze. Claire lightly touched Ethan's arm. "Ethan?" He didn't move. Ryan glanced at the touch, then smiled wider. "Girlfriend?" he asked. "Interesting." There was a brief pause, not an awkward silence, the kind that comes right before bad decisions. "You don't want to do this," Ethan said at last, his voice low. Ryan raised an eyebrow, as if he'd just heard something hilarious. "Well, look at that," he said, turning to the others. "The guy's giving advice." Laughter broke out in unison, spreading too fast. Mark stepped forward. Lucas drifted closer from the other side. They weren't openly surrounding him, but the space tightened. Ethan felt the familiar weight of that dynamic. He'd seen it before. Different places, different faces. The behavior never changed. "You just got out, didn't you?" Ryan went on, gesturing casually at the plain clothes, the restrained posture. "You can see it in your eyes." Claire held her breath. Ethan stood up slowly, not in defiance, in adjustment. "You're making a mistake," he said. Ryan laughed again, louder this time. "Man," he shook the bottle, "you have no idea where you are." And in that moment, someone behind them, An older man, standing in the doorway of the bar, turned his head away as if he didn't want to witness what was about to unfold. Because right there, on that ordinary street, a prison story was beginning to take shape. The kind where the quietest man is always the most underestimated, and where the biggest mistake isn't what's done with force, but what's provoked without understanding who you're dealing with. In the days that followed that afternoon, the neighborhood kept moving as it always had. Metal shutters rolled up in the mornings, engines sputtered to life, conversations drifted across the street without a clear destination. To an outsider, nothing had changed. But to anyone paying attention, the atmosphere felt slightly off, as if something had been shifted a few inches out of place. Ethan noticed it first. He knew environments like that well, not because of how they looked, but because of the invisible logic that held them together. Places like that ran on informal leaders, unspoken rules and hierarchies that rarely needed to be said out loud. Ryan's crew wasn't at the top of the food chain, but they weren't at the bottom either. They lived in the middle, dangerous precisely because they believed they already had enough power. Claire sensed the change differently. For her, the unease showed up in small details. Looks that lingered too long, conversations that stopped when she walked by, the constant feeling of being measured. It wasn't outright fear, it was anticipation. "They're waiting for something," she said one night, in the small apartment where they were staying. The place was modest, rented short-term, sparse furniture, walls too clean to hide any past. Ethan sat at the table, taking apart and reassembling an old watch with almost ritual precision. "They are," he replied. "They just haven't decided what yet." Claire frowned. "How do you know?" He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, choosing his words. "Because when someone laughs too early," he said, "it usually means they're unsure." She didn't push further. She'd learned that some answers came with time, not questions. Meanwhile, Ryan Keller was also thinking about the encounter. Not with anger, with curiosity. The ex-con hadn't reacted the way he'd expected. He hadn't begged, hadn't flared up, hadn't tried to prove anything. To Ryan, that felt almost insulting. "He thinks he's better than us," Ryan said to Mark as they stood in the back of the makeshift gym where they trained. "Or maybe he just doesn't care," Mark shrugged. Ryan clenched his fist. "Everybody cares, especially someone fresh out." Lucas, who'd been listening quietly, added, "There's something off about him. He doesn't run with anyone, doesn't talk to anyone, but nobody messes with him." Ryan laughed, but it came out short. "That's because nobody's really tested him." Over the next few days, small things began to stack up. Comments thrown from a distance, the same faces showing up at the same times. A seemingly casual encounter near the market, nothing direct. Everything carefully calibrated to apply pressure without crossing a line. Ethan noticed every move. He didn't react. He adjusted. Routes, schedules, posture. He didn't avoid them. He observed. Claire began to realize that his silence wasn't absence. It was analysis. "You know this kind of people," she said one morning. "I know this kind of system," he corrected. She waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Elsewhere in the city, far from that neighborhood, an administrative office inside a commercial building ran through its usual routine. Phones rang, meetings were scheduled, decisions were made. None of it seeming remotely connected to that stretch of street. A man named Victor Hale signed documents calmly, reviewed reports, and occasionally checked his watch, as if waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. Victor wasn't thinking about Ethan at that moment. But Ethan existed within a set of variables Victor never fully ignored. Back in the neighborhood, the tension thickened. Ryan's group decided to act, not with violence, but with exposure. The plan was simple: humiliate him just enough to reassert control. A public gesture, a silent warning. "In front of the girl," Mark said with a grin. "Always works." Ryan nodded. "Tomorrow." That same night, Ethan stood by the window, watching the street below. Claire sat behind him trying to read, failing to focus. "If this gets out of hand," she began. "It won't," he said. "You can't be sure." Ethan turned slowly. For the first time since his release, there was something different in his eyes. Not a threat. Calculation. "I can," he said. "Because when someone is desperate to be seen, they forget to watch the one who stays quiet." The encounter didn't unfold as a direct confrontation, at least not in the classic sense. It was designed to feel casual, almost unavoidable, the kind of situation that could later be dismissed as a joke taken too far. The street grill was up and running again that night, drawing in locals and curious outsiders. Low music, scattered laughter, the smell of meat and smoke mixing with the heat trapped in the asphalt. A perfect setting for anyone who wanted an audience without attracting the attention of authorities. Ethan arrived with Claire a little after 7. He immediately clocked who was already there. Ryan leaning near the metal table, Mark pretending to scroll on his phone. Lucas scanning the area with exaggerated focus. 2 other men rounded out the group, forming an informal semicircle. Nothing was said in the first few minutes. Ethan ordered food, paid, said thank you, sat down. Claire stayed close, uneasy, sensing that the normalcy was artificial. The laughter around them felt rehearsed, the silence between them deliberate. Ryan was the first to close the distance. "You two eat here often?" he asked, feigning curiosity. "When we can," Ethan replied. "Interesting," Ryan said, taking a sip from the bottle. "Not everyone feels comfortable around here." Mark let out a low laugh. "Especially people who just made it back to the real world." Claire clenched her fingers. "We're not bothering anyone," she said. Ryan turned slowly toward her, appraising her as if she were part of the scenery. No, he said. "Just watching." He took another step forward. This time the intent was clear. He lifted the bottle and tilted it slightly, letting a few drops spill onto the ground near Ethan's feet. "You know what they say," Ryan continued. "Prison changes people. Either it breaks you, or it teaches you how to obey." Ethan didn't move. That was what triggered the next gesture. Ryan tipped the bottle a little further, letting the liquid run slowly, soaking the shoulder of Ethan's shirt. It wasn't a violent act. It was worse. It was exposure, a silent performance. Some people nearby looked away. Others pretended not to see. No one stepped in. Claire stood up immediately. "Stop it," she said, her voice shaking. Ryan smiled. "Relax, just a little welcome toast." Lucas watched Ethan's face closely, waiting for something. A shove, an insult, anything that would justify the next step. Nothing came. Ethan took a slow breath, closed his eyes for a brief second, then stood up calmly. The liquid ran down the side of his face, dripping onto the pavement. The silence around them grew too heavy to ignore. "Are you done?" Ethan asked quietly. Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "The show," Ethan repeated. There was a brief pause. Not fear, confusion. This wasn't the reaction they'd planned for. Humiliation was supposed to lead to an outburst or submission, not neutrality. Ryan shrugged. "We're just having some fun." Ethan took a napkin, wiped his face slowly, then looked around. His eyes passed over every face, noting who watched, who smirked, who stepped back. There was no visible anger, only attention. "Then enjoy yourselves," he said, "but choose a better stage next time." He took Claire's hand. "Let's go." They walked away under confused stares. No one followed, not yet. For Ryan, it wasn't a win, it was an unresolved frustration. The lack of reaction bothered him more than any direct confrontation would have. "He's pretending," Mark said later. "No one swallows that quietly." Ryan didn't answer. He just stared at the empty bottle. That same night, elsewhere in the city, Victor Hale received a brief call. No details, just a displaced piece of information, seemingly insignificant. "He was provoked," the voice on the other end said. He didn't react. Victor stayed silent for a few seconds. "I understand," he replied. "Keep watching." Back at the apartment, Claire couldn't sleep. Ethan sat on the balcony, looking out over the city like someone mapping routes. "You could have gotten hurt," she said. "They wanted something else," he replied. "What?" He took his time answering. "A reaction that would justify their mistake." Claire sat beside him. "And now?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Now they'll push harder. Because anyone who thinks they've won once needs to prove they can keep winning." The days that followed brought no new direct provocations, and to Ethan that was the clearest sign that the conflict was deepening. The absence of an attack wasn't retreat. It was calculation. Groups like Ryan's rarely acted on sustained impulse. They preferred to test boundaries, watch reactions, and adjust pressure accordingly. Claire felt it in her body before she fully understood it in her mind. The neighborhood no longer felt neutral. There were no explicit threats, just small fractures in the routine. A car slowing as it passed, a conversation cutting off when she entered a store, the same face appearing in different places throughout the day. "They're tagging us," she said one afternoon as they walked back from the market. "They're trying to," Ethan replied. She stopped. "You say that like it's a game." Ethan looked at her carefully. "It's not a game, it's a system. And systems hate the unpredictable." Meanwhile, Ryan was dealing with a different problem. His authority was starting to be questioned, not openly but in the details. Mark didn't laugh with the same confidence anymore. Lucas asked too many questions. The group could feel that something had slipped out of their control. "You should have gone further that day," Mark said during a conversation in a remote parking lot. "And create a bigger problem?" Ryan shot back. "That wasn't the plan." "But now it escalated anyway," Lucas insisted, "just without us understanding how." Ryan clenched his fist. "He's just an ex-con." Lucas held his gaze. "Then why do you keep talking about him?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable enough to sting. In parallel, a quiet subplot was unfolding far from the neighborhood. Victor Hale received new reports. They weren't alarming, but the pattern caught his attention. Small, discreet movements tied to names he recognized. Nothing illegal, nothing overt, just repositioning. "Is he making moves?" Victor asked over the phone. "Not directly," the voice replied. "But people around him are." Victor ended the call without comment. He didn't need explicit confirmation. That was enough. Back at the apartment, Claire began to question Ethan's past more often, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a need to understand. She knew he'd spent years in prison. She knew he avoided talking about it. What she didn't know was what exactly he had learned during that time. "You've never told me what it was like in there," she said one night. Ethan took his time before answering. "Because it's not a single story," he said. "It's a series of quiet decisions, watching who holds power without raising their voice, understanding who survives because they're seen, and who survives because no one notices." "And which were you?" she asked. He glanced at the old watch on the table. "The one who learned fast." Claire realized that was all she was going to get, at least for now. In the neighborhood, Ryan decided he needed to reassert control, not over Ethan directly, but over the environment itself. He started showing up more often, talking louder, taking up space. A classic mistake. The more visible he became, the clearer his insecurity grew. Ethan watched from a distance. "He's exposing himself," he remarked to Claire. "Is that good or bad? Depends on who's watching." The situation grew more complex because no one had all the pieces. Ryan believed he was dealing with an ordinary man, just more reserved. Claire was beginning to suspect there was something far larger behind Ethan's silence. Victor, meanwhile, saw signals that couldn't be ignored, but still didn't justify direct intervention. It was that misalignment of perception that made everything unstable. One night, returning home, Ethan found a simple note taped to the door. No explicit threat. No signature, just a time and an address. Claire read it over his shoulder. "Is this a trap?" "No," Ethan said. "It's an invitation." "To what?" He folded the paper carefully. "For them to make their next mistake." The address on the note led to an old administrative building, set away from the commercial center, used by small companies that valued discretion over visibility. Nothing eye-catching, no bright signage, just concrete, darkened glass, and a nearly empty parking lot. Ethan arrived alone. It wasn't recklessness, it was a choice. Claire understood that the moment he explained it to her, without drama, without emphasis, that this part had to be done that way. She didn't like it, but she recognized something in his tone. Not defiance, not pride, control. Inside, the building smelled of recent cleaning and echoed with old footsteps. A private security guard pointed the way without asking questions. The elevator climbed too slowly, as if testing the patience of whoever stood inside it. The room was on the 3rd floor. Ryan Keller was already there, leaning against a long table with Mark and Lucas beside him. No smiles this time, no bottles. The casual air had been replaced by a deliberate attempt at dominance. "I didn't think you'd show," Ryan said. Ethan closed the door behind him. "You were clear about the time," he replied. Ryan studied his face, searching for traces of the man from the street grill. Tension, anger, discomfort. He found none. "Sit," Ryan said, pointing to a chair. Ethan didn't. "I'd rather stand." Mark exchanged a quick glance with Lucas. Small details were beginning to throw them off. This wasn't the dynamic they'd pictured. "Let's get to the point," Ryan continued. "You've been walking into places you don't know, creating unnecessary situations." "I didn't create anything," Ethan said. "I just didn't react." Ryan gave a half smile. "Sometimes that's worse." A short pause followed, the kind of silence that forces someone to fill it. Ryan felt it. "We can settle this easily," he added. "You disappear. Go back to where you came from. Nobody gets hurt." Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if weighing something beyond the words. "You're offering me an exit," he said. "I'm being reasonable." "No," Ethan corrected. "You're trying to end something you don't understand." Ryan planted both hands on the table. "Look, man, it doesn't matter who you were before. Here, right now, you're nobody." That was the moment something shifted. Not in Ethan's tone, not in volume, but in the way he looked at Ryan, not as someone in front of him, but as someone already catalogued. "You're right," Ethan said. "Here, right now, I'm nobody visible." Lucas frowned. "Then we're clear." "No," Ethan replied. "That's exactly where you're wrong." Ryan laughed, but tension crept into the sound. "Wrong how?" Ethan finally pulled out the chair and sat down. He folded his hands on the table. "You think control comes from presence," he said. "From taking up space, from being seen." "I learned something else," Mark cut in. "We didn't come here for a lesson." "I know," Ethan said. "You came to confirm something." The silence returned, heavier this time. "Confirm what?" Ryan asked. Ethan took a slow breath. "Whether I was worth the risk." Ryan felt a sudden discomfort he couldn't explain. "And are you?" he challenged. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he took out his phone and placed it on the table, screen facing up. No explicit threat, no video, just a name displayed as a missed call. Victor Hale. Lucas recognized it first. His body reacted before his face did. "Wait," he murmured. Ryan looked at the phone, then at Lucas. "What is it?" Lucas swallowed hard. "That name, it's not random." Ethan kept his eyes on Ryan. "You called me here because you thought you were in control," he said. "That was the turning point. Not because I showed up, but because you insisted." A cold sensation ran down Ryan's spine. Not fear, not yet. Something worse. The unsettling feeling of having gone from hunter to unknown variable. "So who are you, really?" Ryan asked, his voice tighter now. Ethan stood. "Someone you should have left alone when you had the chance." He walked to the door, opened it, and before stepping out said without turning back, "You don't get to decide when this ends anymore." When the door closed, no one spoke for several seconds. Ryan was the first to move, rubbing his face. "Find out everything about him," he said. Everything. But the real question was no longer who Ethan was. It was which part of the biggest mistake they had just made, and how many more were still ahead. The effects of the meeting weren't immediate. There were no sirens, no confrontations, no threatening messages. The impact came in the most uncomfortable way possible, through silence. Ryan noticed it that same night. Replies on his phone took longer. Confirmations came back incomplete. People who used to answer on the first ring started calling back hours later, if they called back at all. Nothing explicit, nothing he could confront directly. Mark tried to move first. I pulled everything I could, he said, dropping a stack of papers on the table. Old case, sentence served, no recent connections. Ryan flipped through the documents impatiently. That doesn't explain the name, he muttered, or the way he spoke. Lucas stayed leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's because it wasn't meant to explain anything, he said. It was meant to make us think. Ryan looked up. Think about what? Lucas hesitated. About who hasn't shown up yet. The words hung in the air. Meanwhile, Ethan went home as if nothing had happened. He washed his hands, changed his shirt, sat down to dinner with Claire. The normalcy wasn't an act. It was part of the process. Claire noticed the shift anyway. You crossed a line today, she said. They crossed it first, he replied. And now? Ethan took a moment before answering. Now they'll react badly. The next day, the neighborhood's behavior changed, not in movement but in caution. Ryan's group appeared less often. When they did show up, they kept their distance. Conversations stopped when Ethan passed, not with hostility, but with calculation. A bar owner who had previously avoided eye contact gave Ethan a subtle nod. A parking lot guard stopped tracking him with his gaze. Small corrections, small signs of realignment. Ryan saw all of it. They're pulling away, he said, anger held tightly in check, like we did something wrong. Mark replied, maybe we did. We didn't do anything, Ryan snapped. He's just an ex-con. Lucas exhaled slowly. Or that's what you wanted to believe. The most unexpected reaction came from outside their immediate circle. An intermediary, someone who rarely took sides, called Ryan with a question too simple to ignore. Did you mess with someone named Ethan Cole? Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Why? Because that name is starting to show up in places that don't match the profile you gave me. The call ended before Ryan could ask anything else. At the apartment, Claire watched Ethan pack a small bag. Are you leaving town? She asked. For a few days, he said. Not to run, to adjust. Adjust what? Expectations. She stepped closer. You still haven't told me who you were before. Ethan zipped the bag and set it on the floor. Because that doesn't matter anymore, he said. What matters is who people think I still am. She understood. Not completely, but enough not to press. Across the city, Victor Hale stepped into a brief meeting with no formal agenda. He listened more than he spoke. He watched names, connections, movements. At the end, he asked only one question. Did they get it? No one answered right away. Not yet, someone said, but they will. Victor nodded. Then time is doing its job. Ryan, meanwhile, began to feel the real weight of the consequences. It wasn't a direct threat. It was the slow erosion of control. People backing away. Information drying up. Decisions being made without him. He still didn't understand the scale of the problem, only that something had shifted out of place. Ethan left that night without drawing attention. He exited the neighborhood with the same discretion he'd arrived with. He didn't need to be present for the effect to continue. Sometimes the real impact doesn't come from confrontation, but from absence, when everyone starts reacting to something they can no longer reach. The days Ethan spent out of the city weren't an emotional escape. They were a quiet return to the kind of space where he had always thought most clearly. Less stimulation, less noise, more room to read the landscape. The place he stayed wasn't special, a low-profile motel near a secondary highway used by people who didn't want to be remembered. It was enough. He woke up early, walked a few blocks, watched who came and went. Not out of paranoia, but habit. Some lessons don't fade with time. They sharpen. Claire stayed in the city, not out of weakness, but by choice. She needed to feel the environment without him nearby, to understand whether the tension she sensed came from the situation or from his presence. It didn't take long to realize it was the situation. Ryan didn't disappear, but he changed. He became more careful, less expansive. He avoided quick decisions, asked before acting. For someone who had always led through presence, it was a clear sign of strain. "You're different," Mark said one night. Ryan didn't answer right away. "I'm paying attention," he said finally. "Since when does paying attention turn into fear?" Ryan shot him a cold look. "Since invisible people started moving things without showing up." Lucas watched it all with growing detachment. He no longer believed the problem was Ethan as a person. It was what Ethan represented. Proof that they had misjudged someone, and that others might do the same. Meanwhile, Ethan began receiving messages. Not requests, not threats, adjustments, people wanting to confirm positions, rethink routes, align expectations. Nothing that placed him formally at the center. Everything reinforcing something he already knew well. Real influence rarely needs an announcement. One message stood out, short, direct. "They still don't get it, but they're closer." He deleted it without replying. Claire felt the shift before she could see it. The neighborhood felt less hostile. Conversations picked back up. Looks didn't linger as long. The tension hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed direction. "They're backing off," she said over the phone during a brief call with Ethan. "No," he replied. "They're recalibrating. And that's better. It's more honest." Claire began to understand that overcoming this wasn't about beating someone. It was about no longer being the easy variable. Growth didn't come from exposure, but from repositioning. Under pressure from doubts both internal and external, Ryan made his quietest mistake. He tried to prove he still had control. He set up unnecessary meetings, made vague promises, tried to reassert dominance where presence alone had once been enough. "This is going to go wrong," Lucas warned. "You think I don't know that?" Ryan shot back. "But if I don't act, I've already lost." Lucas said nothing. He just watched. Ethan returned to the city on an ordinary morning without announcement. He passed through the neighborhood like any other day. No one approached him. No one provoked him. He was simply noticed, differently. Claire met him near the same spot where everything had started weeks earlier. No street grill this time, just empty space. "It feels like a different place," she said. "It's not the place," Ethan replied. "It's the expectations." They walked together, unhurried. Ethan didn't need to explain what had changed in him. The growth was in the fact that he no longer needed to react to be understood. Ryan watched them from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't look away. He simply accepted something that had taken too long to register. The power he thought had been taken from him was never removed by force. It was eroded by insistence. Ethan felt the exact moment when he stopped being seen as a target and started being treated as context. Not an enemy. Not an ally. A factor to be considered. That was the real victory, not defeating someone publicly, but growing to the point where there was nothing left to prove. The sense of normalcy that settled in didn't bring relief. It brought expectation. For Ethan, it was always like that. When an environment grew too quiet, it usually meant someone was choosing the wrong moment to act. He slipped back into his routine with almost invisible precision. Adjusted schedules, alternate routes, brief encounters. Nothing that drew attention on its own, but enough that anyone who knew how to read patterns could tell something was forming. Not by him, but around him. Claire noticed it first through people's behavior. The open hostility was gone, replaced by exaggerated caution, doors closing a little too fast, conversations cutting off more often, a tense kind of respect, built not from admiration, but from fear of making a mistake. "They're waiting for something," she said. "They always are," Ethan replied. "The difference is who thinks they control the wait." Ryan, meanwhile, felt boxed in by something he couldn't quite name. There was no direct threat, no clear message, no confrontation, just the constant sense that every decision he made was being watched by someone who never appeared. He called a restricted meeting. Nothing large, nothing official, just the ones he still trusted. "We can't keep going like this," he said, pacing. "Everyone walking on eggshells because of one guy who doesn't even do anything." Lucas looked at him. "Maybe that's exactly the problem." "What is?" "He doesn't do anything visible." Silence settled in. Ryan stopped pacing. "So what are you suggesting?" Lucas hesitated before answering. "That we stop reacting. Let it fade out." Ryan let out a short laugh. "That kind of thing doesn't die on its own. It just changes shape." That was when Ryan made his final decision. Unannounced. Unshared. He decided to force an ending. A clean, fast move that would reassert control and put an end to the feeling of being watched. The problem wasn't the decision. It was the timing. Ethan knew something was about to happen, not from direct information, but from absence. A name that stopped circulating. An intermediary who didn't return a call. A route that suddenly cleared too easily. "He's going to try something," Ethan said to Claire, his tone unchanged. "Tonight? Soon. And you?" Ethan paused before answering. "I'll be exactly where he thinks I shouldn't be." The place Ryan chose was symbolic. An administrative space where decisions were made away from public view. A place where he believed control still worked. He invited the right people at the right time with a vague promise of resolving loose ends. He didn't mention Ethan. That was the mistake. Meanwhile, Victor Hale followed everything from a distance. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. He knew some corrections only completed themselves when someone insisted on taking the wrong path. "He's going to expose himself," someone said in the room. Victor nodded. "He already is." On the scheduled night, the city seemed indifferent. Normal traffic, lights on, nothing to suggest the axis was about to shift. Ethan left home without urgency, dressed as always. No symbols, no signals, just enough presence for those who knew how to recognize it. Claire stayed behind, not because she was excluded, but because she understood. Some parts didn't need to be shared to be understood. Ryan arrived early. He walked with confidence, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders were too tight, his attention too sharp. When the door opened again, he expected to see allies. He didn't expect to see Ethan. The shock wasn't immediate. It came with delay, like a misread signal. "You," Ryan started. Ethan stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "You set this meeting to end something," he said. "So did I." The air shifted, not from a direct threat, but from the quiet certainty that the moment of choice had arrived. Everything built up until then, the looks, the absences, the insistence, converged at that point. The climax wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be physical, it would be final. The room felt smaller than Ryan remembered, or maybe it was the silence compressing it. Cold lights reflected off the darkened glass, creating the uneasy sense that more people were watching than were actually present. Ethan remained standing a few steps from the central table. He didn't sit. He didn't lean on anything. He simply occupied the space with the same restraint he had always used. Ryan took a deep breath before speaking. "You weren't invited." "I was provoked," Ethan replied. "That's different." Ryan's hand slowly curled into a fist. "You think you walked in here and changed everything?" Ethan tilted his head slightly. "No, you changed everything when you decided to keep pushing." The door opened again. Mark came in first, followed by two men Ryan knew too well to pretend surprise. They froze when they saw Ethan. The discomfort was immediate, almost physical. "What's he doing here?" one of them asked. Ryan answered before Ethan could. "He's finishing what he started." Ethan studied the newcomers with calm attention. He didn't need their names. He already knew exactly who they were, and more importantly, who they weren't. "You came here because you believed this would be simple," Ethan said. "An internal adjustment. A small problem." One of the men crossed his arms. "And it isn't?" Ethan stepped forward. Not to threaten, to realign the center of the conversation. "Only if you keep pretending you don't know what's actually happening." Ryan felt the weight of those words before fully grasping them. There was something in Ethan's tone that made it clear this wasn't about immediate power, but accumulated consequences. "Just say it," Ryan said. "What do you want?" Ethan placed his hands on the table and leaned in slightly. "I want you to stop." The silence that followed wasn't disbelief, it was calculation. "Stop what?" Mark asked. "Stop trying to prove something that no longer exists," Ethan replied. "Stop insisting on a mistake that started small and grew too large to erase." Ryan laughed, but the sound was thin. "You walk in here, talk like you have authority, and expect everyone to go along with it?" Ethan kept his eyes on him. "I don't expect acceptance, I expect recognition." One of the men looked away first, not out of fear, but delayed understanding. He'd seen situations like this before, when someone spoke too little to be improvising. "Do you know who he is?" that man asked Ryan quietly. Ryan answered too fast. "I know enough." "No," the other corrected. "You know what he let you see?" The tension rose another notch. There was no open threat, but the invisible hierarchy was already rearranging itself, right there in real time. Ethan straightened. "I didn't come here to take anything over," he said. "I've already done that once. I'm not interested in repeating it." Ryan frowned. "Then why are you here?" "Because you mistook silence for absence," Ethan said. "And that always comes at a cost." He pulled his phone from his pocket again and set it on the table. There were no calls, no messages, just the gesture. "From now on," he continued, "any move that involves my name, directly or indirectly, stops being a local problem." Eyes met across the room. No one asked how. No one demanded details. Everyone there knew how to recognize a deliberately withheld explanation. Ryan felt something give inside him. Not sudden defeat, but the late realization that the game had been played long before he even knew he was part of it. "And if I don't accept?" he asked, almost under his breath. Ethan answered without raising his voice. "Then you keep going, and you find out on your own how long it takes before there's no one left willing to answer for you." The silence stretched. Mark was the first to exhale. "Maybe it's better to end this," he said. Ryan looked around. For the first time, he didn't see automatic support. He saw caution, calculation, people choosing not to make the same mistake together. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "It ends here." Ethan picked up his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. "It ends now," he corrected, "only because you decided to stop." He stepped away from the table and walked to the door. Before leaving, he spoke one last line, without turning back. "Next time, choose more carefully who you try to belittle. Not everyone needs to be seen to be in control." When the door closed, no one moved for several seconds. The climax hadn't been a physical confrontation. It had been confirmation of their greatest mistake, underestimating someone who never needed to prove anything. The days following the meeting were strangely quiet. Not the kind of silence charged with tension before a clash, but a functional silence. The kind that settles in after decisions have already been made and no one wants to be the first to challenge them. Ethan returned to his routine with the same discretion as always. He walked the same routes, greeted the same people, took up the same small amount of space. What had changed was how the environment responded. There were no lingering stares, no misplaced laughter. The neighborhood had learned something, even if it couldn't quite put it into words. Claire noticed it one ordinary afternoon as she sat on the same bench where everything had begun weeks earlier. No one approached, no one provoked. The space around her remained neutral, deliberately neutral. "It feels like it's over," she said. Ethan watched the flow of the street before answering. "It's over because someone stopped insisting," he said, "not because someone won." Ryan, meanwhile, tried to reclaim whatever control he still believed he had, but the effort felt out of place. People kept working, talking, making decisions, just with more caution and less need for external validation. He was still there, but he no longer occupied the invisible center he thought was his by right. Mark drifted away not long after. Lucas began planning his own exit. Nothing was announced. It simply happened. The erosion wasn't loud. It was gradual. Ethan received few messages, none that demanded a response, just quiet confirmations that the environment had adjusted. He didn't celebrate. There was nothing to display. The outcome wasn't meant to be showcased. On a calm evening, he and Claire walked down a street lit by old lampposts. The atmosphere felt almost too ordinary to match what had unfolded there weeks earlier. "You never wanted to go back to that life, did you?" she asked. Ethan took his time answering. "I wanted to leave knowing exactly why I was leaving," he said. "Not out of fear, not because I was forced." She nodded. "And now?" He paused, looking around. "Now I can stay, without having to prove anything." The mistake that set everything in motion wasn't the public gesture or the humiliation. It was the insistence on reading silence as weakness. The failure to recognize that some people learn to command space not through visible force, but through patient awareness of timing. Ethan didn't change the neighborhood. He simply made it clear that he didn't belong to the easy logic that held it together. Sometimes that's enough. Months later, the neighborhood moved at its usual pace. People came and went. Faces changed. Stories piled up without record. Ethan was no longer talked about. It was exactly how he preferred it. Claire moved on with the calm of someone who passed through something difficult without needing to look back. As for Ryan, his name slowly faded from conversation, not through a dramatic fall, but through gradual irrelevance. Some men don't fall, they simply stop being considered. And sometimes, that's the most final ending of all. If you made it this far, it's because you noticed something many would have missed from the start. This wasn't a story about strength or visible confrontation, but about reading the room, strategic silence, and the cost of underestimating someone. Comment, "I stayed till the end, so I know who really understood what was happening before the final words." If you want more stories built on psychological tension, quiet turns, and decisions that change everything without making noise, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next stories will demand even more attention.